Hello, this is Dr. Vermet again, and this time I'd like to speak with you about Chapter 2 of your text. We're in Module 2 of Sociology 101, and at this point we're going to focus on how sociologists focus on asking and answering questions, sociological questions. To adequately prepare to answer questions, the sociologist explores 4 types of questions. The types listed here, factual or empirical, comparative, developmental, and theoretical, are discussed in great detail in your text. So make sure that you're able to define these and give examples. This will help you to do your assignments as well as to do well on tests, but more importantly, it will help you to understand how the world around you works and maybe give you just a slightly different perspective of the workings that are going around you that you take part in. As I've always said, you are sociology. So the sociologist doesn't just go out and say, well, I think I'll just observe stuff. They have basic concepts of research process that they follow. And the sociologist follows an 8-step process. We'll be asking and answering the following questions as we look at this process. Which step comes first in the research process? Which step in the research process involves asking questions about the relationship among variables? Which step comes first, carrying out the research or reviewing the literature? Which step in the research project involves stating the significance of your results and how these results relate to the research that has been done before? And lastly, we'll be looking at what is the final step in the research process and why this final step might also be considered the first step of the research process. Now remember, what we're looking at and what we're talking about in this brief video is exactly that. It's a brief video, so it's a very broad overview. Be sure that you read your text to get a better and more complete understanding of the topics that we'll be talking about. So let's take a look at this research process. This isn't the only thing that's covered in this chapter, but I just picked this to give you an introduction, kind of a taste of what's included in this module. There are 8 stages in the research process, and the first step in the research process is to define the research problem. It's at this stage that the sociologist determines where the gaps exist in an understanding about a topic. What questions still haven't been answered? What puzzles still haven't been solved? At this stage, the sociologist raises questions that often start out with what, where, when, how, and why. Now, sometimes a sociologist or any researcher will duplicate research that's gone before. And that kind of replicated research is very important because it gives credibility to the findings. It shows that they are most likely true. We'll be taking a look at the researcher that's looking to define his or her own problem, research problem, and the process that they follow through. Now, it's not different than the process that people who replicate research follow through, but they ask some different questions. So let's move on to the second stage. In the second stage of the research process, the sociologist spends a lot of time reviewing the research that has been conducted about the topic. What questions have already been raised? What questions are still unanswered? How have others approached the problem? Reviewing the evidence helps to clarify the topic, and it gives the researcher a better idea about how to carry out the research. They don't do research in a vacuum. It grows out of something else. out of something before it. It may be another research project, or it may be a question. Okay? After the sociologist reviews the evidence, she's then ready to make the problem more precise. This is when she formulates hypotheses, and hypotheses help to refine the research problem that she poses in the first step. Many people consider hypotheses educated guesses about what is going on that are based on a few relevant pieces of evidence that they have reviewed. Once again, I want to emphasize that these hypotheses or educated guesses aren't pie-in-the-sky kinds of what-ifs. They are tied to previous research. They are educated guesses. They're not out there in left field. Hypotheses are formulated in such a way so that they can be evaluated by using evidence. Facts and data will either support or disprove the hypothesis. In the fourth step of the research process, the sociologist works out a research design. Some hypotheses are better suited to surveys, some to interviews, some to participant observation. It is very important that the methods used in research fit well with the questions being asked and researched. Sociologists have a wide variety of methods from which to choose. What works best depends on factors that you will be reading about in Chapter 2, and that will help to further explain the entire process of research. In the fifth step, the sociologist actually gets the chance to carry out their research. This is when data are systematically gathered according to the research design. If they vary their systematic approach significantly from the research design, then they have a hard time defending their findings. So it's important that their research design be broad enough so that they are prepared for changes that may have to be made in the field, minor fine-tuning, not throwing everything out and starting all over again. It's important that the sociologists be able to be flexible, because when they get in the field, the whole process of gathering information can be somewhat unpredictable because of unexpected problems. Sometimes the plans won't work. Sometimes people don't cooperate. Sometimes data that was supposed to be available isn't or aren't. The more thoroughly the sociologist completes the work in steps 1 through 4, the better she will be able to deal with unexpected problems at this stage and maintain the validity and reliability and credibility of her research. Okay. Moving on to step 6, we find that once the data have been gathered, analysis and interpretation begins. Computers often help the sociologist sort through and make sense of the evidence gathered in the previous stages, or the previous stage, actually. When interpreting the results, the sociologist tries to answer his or her initial questions and determines if the data support the research hypotheses. This is a tricky and sometimes frustrating phrase. Even with careful work at previous stages, researchers often end up with partial answers to research questions or, unfortunately, even inconclusive findings. It's at the 7th step of the research project that the sociologist reports her findings. The research report can take the form of a presentation or a published journal or even a book. The report usually includes the research questions and hypotheses, information about the research design so that the readers will know, or the people in the presentation, the audience, will know how this was gathered, and ultimately the results of the research. The report also often describes new questions and avenues for future research, and depending on the topic, the report could include suggestions. Okay. Once the findings are registered and discussed in the wider academic community, the final stage involves future replications of research on the basis of new questions raised. And I say replications because it's that future research is an extension, okay? So maybe better than replications, say future versions of research on the basis of new questions raised. Good research usually includes elements of all steps of the research process, but some projects don't fit neatly or completely into the 8 stages, or they don't proceed in exactly the order prescribed. So once again, flexibility is the name of the game. So now that we've concluded our discussion of the research process, I would like you to read about it in your text, read the entire chapter so you have a comprehensive picture of sociological questions and answers, and how that will help you doing your assignments. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you again next week.